Hey everyone, thank you for showing up tonight. This is Yusufchowdhury and part of the San Antonio WordPress meetup group here with Rob from Pressable. We're gonna have an awesome session right now, right? Yep. I hope so. So let me go and flip the screen real quick. And there you go. All right. It's all yours, my friend.
All right. Hi, my name is Robert Villarreal. I talked for the group last month about WP-CLI, the command line interface for WordPress. And this week, tonight, we'll talk a little bit about SSL, what it is, why it's important for websites, and more importantly, why it's important for WordPress, and what we can do to make obtaining SSL certificates a little bit easier, not only as site owners, but as administrators of servers and things like that. So the talk will start off pretty simple and with a relatively beginner and basic level understanding of what SSL is. And then at the very end, we'll kind of maybe get a little bit into some of the grittier details about the specifics of SSL and a little bit more about Let's Encrypt and what that's about and why that's a big deal. So I guess we'll go ahead and just get started by talking a little bit about SSL. SSL itself is just is a way that people who have websites on the internet can protect the data that goes through their websites. If you've ever used a banking website online or purchased something on Amazon, if you've ever reset a password somewhere or gotten transferred any sort of secure information, you've probably used SSL, whether or not you knew it. SSL is critical in helping make sure that all the data that we transfer across the web and in web browsers is secure and encrypted and safe when it makes its way across the internet. Now, as it pertains to websites specifically, you'll see SSL used primarily in the form of the HTTPS protocol. So you're used to visiting websites at http://yourwebsite.com. But there's a lot of websites that you use, like banks and maybe universities and other institutions, where you'll use the HTTPS protocol instead. And the HTTPS protocol is what indicates, is the indicator that the session that you're browsing in currently is a secure session, and that all of the data that's being transferred to and from your browser or between your browser and the server is secured data. That's very important, especially with banking information and sensitive information, because you want to make sure that all of this data that you're sending back and forth is not available for anybody to just pick out of the air in clear text and do whatever they want with it. Those are all also important places where you're transmitting financial information, making large transactions, so you want all of that information to be secured. And then even places just like Facebook and other places on the web where you're just leisurely browsing, you still use passwords, you still send private messages and interact with other people online, and you want to do that in as secure a way as possible. So those are a couple of places where SSL is used. So let's talk a little bit about how it works. The way that SSL works is that you begin the process by finding a place where you can purchase an SSL certificate from. In most cases, you'll look toward a certificate issuer or a certificate authority that will sell SSL certificates, so that you can actually provide them with the information that you need to be able to purchase an SSL certificate and then use it on your website. The way that you start that process is by figuring out pricing. Obviously, there's a lot of places, or maybe not so obviously, but there's a lot of places on the internet where you can purchase SSL certificates. And though many of them have a very similar offering as far as what these SSL certificates do, the primary method, or one of the primary things that separates how expensive an SSL certificate will be is based on the level of authentication, or the level of validation. And what that means is that a certificate that you have to go to longer lengths to verify that you are the owner of a specific website. Those are usually more expensive certificates because it's a more timely and a more thorough process to verify identity. And then in addition to that, you get perks like green bar and wildcard domains to protect many domains, not just a single one. And so different types of certificates will have different price ranges, but if we're just talking about a single certificate that you want to use on a single website, for the most part the base certificate offering for a lot of certificate issuers will be pretty sufficient. It will actually offer you the protection that you need for a relatively simple website, and then if you need something like a green bar, then you can look into higher cost SSL certificates that also require that you validate your information a little bit more. The SSL certificate process actually starts by providing a certificate issuer with some pretty basic information. The name of your organization, the city and state that that organization is based out of, and then of course the domain that you want to protect. I'm going to show an example here a little bit later where I set up some SSL certificates for my personal domain, but you could do them for whatever you would like, for your, whether it's a personal blog or a site with pictures of your family, or if you're running a store online. Then all of that is information that you would provide to the certificate issuer, and then they begin the process for validating an SSL certificate. Typically what that entails it entails two big things. One, the certificate issuer wants you to verify who you are and that you are actually the organization that you're saying this SSL certificate is for. And then secondly, and most importantly, they want you to verify that you actually own the domain that you are trying to obtain an SSL certificate for. Obviously, having an SSL certificate for Amazon.com shouldn't be something that everybody should be able to get.
Hey guys, I have a huge announcement for you today. I would like to buy your...
Sorry.
You should only be able to get an SSL certificate if you are the owner of Amazon.com. And it's similar for any domain, because you shouldn't be able to have an SSL certificate for a domain that you don't own. That would kind of defeat the purpose, right? And so there's definitely a process for that. There's a process for proving that you own a domain, and then and only then will a certificate authority and a certificate issuer provide you with an SSL certificate that you can then use to secure your website. So the start of the process is that you provide them with that information, and as a part of that, you use that information to create a file that's called a CSR. CSR is called, it's a certificate signing request, and what that is it gives the certificate issuer a way to know how to create a certificate that matches something called the key. The key is something that you generate alongside the CSR, and the CSR provides the certificate issuer with kind of like a blueprint, letting them know or instructing them on how they can actually create a certificate that matches the key that you generated alongside your CSR. That's really important because the certificate and the key are a lot like a key and a lock. You wouldn't transport a key and a lock together, but if you provided somebody with a key maker with some instructions on how to make a key that would open your lock, then you never actually, without having to actually give them the lock, then that would be very helpful. This is a similar situation to SSL. Having both your key and your certificate in one place is all you need to have a valid key and certificate pair, and so you definitely want to keep the key in a very secure place. That way when a certificate issuer provides you with an SSL certificate, you can just put those all together on your server and move on with your life. So that's the next step, is that once you've actually obtained the certificate, or once you actually validated your organization and you've actually validated that you own a domain, you provide that CSR to the certificate issuer, and they'll go ahead and have that certificate created and issued to you. SSL certificates can be issued for nearly any period of time. You'll see most SSL certificates are issued for as little as 1 year, and most commonly 2 years and up from there. But you're typically renewing an SSL certificate on a yearly basis or every 2 years, and so we'll talk a little bit about Let's Encrypt also. But Let's Encrypt actually, because it's a free certificate, it is still very easy to have a certificate issued, and it's free, and it still is just as valid and important a process with Let's Encrypt. But Let's Encrypt actually makes you validate or reissue those certificates every 90 days, so they'll expire a little bit more often, but they're free, and they're an SSL certificate just like any other that you would have created before. So I guess at this point what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about SSL and how it pertains to WordPress. And so I'm going to go and sit down at the computer and show a few, 1 or 2 plugins that are actually very helpful in helping get SSL installed on your site. And then we'll get a little bit more technical and show how to actually use a service like Let's Encrypt to get an SSL certificate, to show how easy it is to use Let's Encrypt to deploy SSL on your own personal server if you're a web developer. So I'm going to go ahead and sit down for a second. I have just here. I have a little bit of a little example site that I had set up to just kind of show some of what SSL will give you as far as protection goes. The site that I'm running right here actually is just a little demo site that I deployed, and right now it's running in HTTP, but you'll see that I actually do have a valid certificate here for it when I load the HTTPS version of the site. The HTTPS version of the site, you can actually view the certificate information by clicking on the little green lock, and under connection you can view the certificate information for this specific site. So under details here, you'll see that I have an SSL certificate for store.im Robert V. It's issued by Let's Encrypt. We talked about Let's Encrypt a little bit earlier. And the domain that it's for is store.imrobertv.com. So it is a valid SSL certificate. Specifically as it pertains to WordPress, if you are using SSL on your WordPress site, you definitely want to make sure that any transaction that you're making through WP Admin is secured. In this case here, I visited the WP Admin login page, but by default, WordPress doesn't do anything to force securing the WordPress admin. So you're forced to either visit the site at the HTTPS URL, or you can install a plugin on the site itself that will actually help force the site to use SSL for you. One of the easiest ways that you can actually do this is through wp-config. wp-config has a constant that you can set called force SSL Admin, and if you set that constant to true, then anytime you make any sort of interaction with the admin interface of WordPress, it'll actually force an SSL connection for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into my wp-config here, and I'm going to go ahead and just set that constant. Whoops. Get rid of that. I'm just going to pick a place inside my wp-config file to save this, and it's a define. Go ahead and set that to true.
Can you change the font because the blue is not? It's not. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Let me me see. Oops. Sorry. So I went ahead and set my constant there. And now I used the wrong one. The actual constant itself is just force SSL Admin. So it's my fault there.
Is this WordPress?
It is.
Okay, we didn't register, but we thought we'd show up at the last minute.
Come on in.
There's still pizza?
No, not for me, but maybe he'll want some. How's it going? I'm Ken.
Okay, so now that we've set that define, we can actually try this one more time. And you'll be able to see that any transaction that I make on the WP, as far as the administrative interface goes, whenever I am attempting to use the non-HTTP version of it, it will actually force it over to HTTP. So that's good and all, but what happens if what you're trying to do is have your entire site run over SSL? Well, there's actually a lot of options out there where you can actually force SSL across your entire website. There's lots of different ways to do it, but in a lot of cases, the easiest way to do it is to use a plugin. There are a lot of plugins out there. There's one specifically that I like that's actually really easy to install, called WordPress Force HTTPS. You can actually drop this plugin directly into your MU plugins folder, and what it will do is it will allow you to just simply drop this in, and it'll force your entire site to HTTPS. So if I navigate to WP content, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm using WP CLI here, so to show the plugins that are on the site right now, I have WordPress Force HTTPS installed. What that'll help ensure is that any sort of request that I make to the site itself will now use SSL as well. And so if any sort of transaction attempts to use HTTP, whether it's in the admin interface or whether it's a post, it ends up getting forced to use SSL. You want this, as of now, there's no reason not to use SSL. A lot of people, or across your entire site, especially if you're running an e-commerce site, it's actually really important to make sure that you're protecting your visitors. And so even if you're running a blog and there's no specific sensitive information being transmitted, being a part of the growing web that is actually the web that's actually growing and moving in the way of all SSL all the time, it's good to do your best to encrypt your site and make sure that you're running HTTPS at all times. Now, you don't have to use this specific plugin that I use. It's something that you can find through GitHub. You can just search for WordPress Force HTTPS, and you'll find that it's a drop-in plugin that you can install. I like this plugin a lot. It works really well, and when I work with Pressable, we do hosting, and in a lot of cases where customers want to force SSL on their site, we'll use this specific plugin. It's very nice. Another option is actually WordPress HTTPS. WordPress HTTPS is really nice because it offers some extended functionality for forcing SSL via the WordPress interface just for specific pages instead of on all pages. And it helps also just, in the spirit of WordPress, help you provide SSL for specific pages on your site and interact with your site in the way that you see fit. So that's pretty nice as well. Plugins like WooCommerce and other e-commerce software, or if you have a member site or any site that, or any plugin similar to that, a lot of those plugins will have SSL force options of their own, and it actually makes it really easy to be able to utilize SSL for that specific plugin and that specific plugin's functionality without a whole lot of effort. Those plugins usually come with options for forcing SSL or even unforcing SSL on any other page that doesn't require it. And so if you're using WordPress, you have an SSL certificate, or you're getting an SSL certificate, then I would highly recommend either a plugin like WordPress HTTPS or like this WordPress Force HTTPS that you can find on GitHub. Highly recommended. And then also as alternatives, there's also the method of using WP-config to force your SSL admin. And then, of course, even from there, you can even change your home and site URL options through your database if you're a little bit more savvy and would like to do it that way. I wouldn't recommend doing it that way. It's a little bit less flexible. I would highly recommend using a plugin or something that's pretty lightweight that will help you force SSL across your entire site. So, having said that, how do you know that your site is actually up and working with SSL, and what does the world actually see when you have it ready to go? There's actually a lot of websites out there that will help you make sure that you've set SSL up correctly on your website. And not only that, but help make sure that everything on your site is loading securely. As a site builder, not only do you have to use HTTPS as the protocol when you're visiting the site, but it's also important to make sure that everything that your site is loading over HTTPS as well, or else you're not going to get the very famous green lock. The green lock is something that's available to any SSL, any site that's secured with SSL. But like you can see here with GitHub, GitHub gets the green bar. The green bar is actually a type of certificate that's called extended validation, and what that means is that GitHub went through a very rigorous verification process to prove that they are the owners of these domains and the owners of this organization. And so whenever you're visiting a site, especially if it's a financial institution or a large online store or e-commerce establishment, then definitely look for the green bar, because it's going to help make sure that you're sending your sensitive data to a trusted source or to a trusted store or provider. Those extended validation certs will also offer you all of the information that you need about who the certificate authority is, all of the organization information, and all of the actual issuer information as well. And so that's a little bit of a difference between having an extended validation certificate and having a standard, just a green line on its own. Question?
You know what the SEO advantages are on extended versus just a standard HTTPS?
I don't think that there are specific SEO advantages, to my knowledge. And to be honest, I'm not 100% tuned into the SEO implications behind SSL certificates on that level. I do know, though, that Google does provide a little bit of a ranking benefit or a consideration benefit to sites that are using SSL. I don't think that there is a difference between whether you're using an extended validation certificate or not, but so long as you're using SSL, you'll certainly get Google's little tip of the hat and get the little extra benefit from them. In addition to that, having SSL is actually of growing importance as far as Google is concerned, and so as the weeks and the months go on, that will be an even greater consideration. So if you're not forcing SSL on your site now, you'll want to, especially if you're wanting to squeeze the most SEO juice that you can out of your site. You'll want to force SSL because it's becoming more and more important as far as Google's rankings are concerned.
Did you talk yet about various options for getting your certificates?
We did talk a little bit about that, but if you have a specific question, then I can answer it. Just as a little bit of a review, there are a lot of places where you can get like a free self-signed certificate. We will be talking a little bit about Let's Encrypt a little bit later. Let's Encrypt is actually very nice, especially if you're like a server administrator where you manage your own server or you handle a lot of your own certificates. But specifically as far as sources and issuers go, there's lots of options and lots of different types of certificate. Which one is for you is completely situational, but in most cases, in most cases across the board, an extended validation certificate is an extended validation certificate, just like any other. How much you pay for it is largely up to the issuer that you choose, and so naturally, if you're purchasing a certificate from somebody like Symantec or VeriSign directly, you'll pay a lot more for that certificate than you will if you're buying the very same level of validation from an entity like GoDaddy or somebody who just tends to sell them a little bit cheaper. Let's Encrypt is actually a very good example of that, because with Let's Encrypt, you can issue and revoke and reissue your own certificates. It's absolutely free, and Let's Encrypt acts as the certificate authority, and so and those certificates are just as good as any other that you would create. Most of the basic certificates that you would create, as far as like GoDaddy's $100, $125 certificates. Really, for that though, the only differences are that Let's Encrypt currently only allows a 90-day certificate lifecycle. So any certificate you issue through Let's Encrypt will only last for 90 days. But anything that you're doing through like GoDaddy or Komodo or any of the big certificate authorities, or certificate issuers, you'll get like 1 and 2 year long-term.
So the Let's Encrypt thing, every 90 days you have to renew?
Yeah, every 90 days you would renew. The thing about Let's Encrypt is that it's definitely something that you'll want to use if you are a server administrator or you are like running your own server, because you can actually use the Let's Encrypt client. It's basically software that you put on your server that will let you add a command, reissue your certificate very easily. So I have a little photos site here that I'll be talking about in a second. That currently, as far as the server that I have up and running is concerned, does not have an SSL certificate, and is not even set up or is not even configured to run SSL. Let's Encrypt is actually really cool because not only will it do the entire signing process and issuing process on its own, it will actually figure out the kind of server you have and modify that server's configurations to enable HTTPS and make sure that it's referencing the right certificates and keys and everything like that. And so it's really, really cool. And with just one command, I'll be able to go from no SSL to full SSL with a perfectly good and valid SSL certificate through Let's Encrypt. And it's free, but it does take a little bit. Currently, it takes a little bit more work to get it to go because you have to actually have the server installed in a place where you can run that issuing process. But Let's Encrypt also has its own rules for how it's going to check that the domain that you're trying to get an SSL certificate for you actually own. And so the easiest way to do that is to have Let's Encrypt running on the same server that your domain is running on, because then Let's Encrypt can interact directly with that site's root directory, so that it can put into place any verification files that it needs and things like that. Let's Encrypt's actually.
How does excuse me, if I'm telling me to shut up, I'm asking too many questions. I have this insatiable curiosity. How does Let's Encrypt make their revenues? Where do their revenues come from?
Currently they don't make it. They make no revenue. Everything that they're doing is funded through donations. And so anything that Let's Encrypt takes in is all from organizations like Mozilla, Akamai, Cisco, the EFF, Facebook has donated, Shopify, which is a really big e-commerce platform, Automatic, the people behind WordPress, are huge backers of Let's Encrypt as well. And what we'll start seeing actually is even WordPress plugins that will help, that you can install on your website, that through the WordPress interface you could potentially through the WordPress interface renew your SSL certificate pretty easily, or issue your SSL certificate even then. And so the way that it is funded, or the way that they make money right now, is purely through sponsorship and through donations. They currently take no actual revenue, or they don't monetize currently. How they do that in the future, I suppose, would be a different story. But as of right now, it's free and it's open for anybody to use. And so this actually just came out of, it was in private beta up until last week.
There's one question here from Greg Myers. It says performance consideration of using ARPs, right, for a whole site load times, penalties of slowness. What?
I think what he's probably talking about is that with HTTP1, running a site securely over HTTPS was something that was actually a big consideration, because with HTTP, you would run your site normal, unencrypted. You would have just your general server speed. But when you attempted to load the site over HTTPS, that encryption process would actually bog down the load time. The counter to that is that whenever you are running SSL, or you're choosing a host, or you're creating your own server, you're running your own environment, you'll want to make sure that you're using HTTP2 instead of HTTP1, because HTTP2 is far faster than the predecessor. And with HTTPS, there are zero considerations to, or there are zero sacrifices that you need to make with HTTPS2. So as long as you're using HTTP2, you can, with confidence, run SSL on every page on your site and have no worry about slowdown. HTTP2 is super, super fast, and I would highly recommend that you use it. If you are running your own server, you can actually go out and find really simple instructions to make sure that you get your sites running under HTTP2 instead of its predecessor. And so long as you're using HTTP2, then the speed consideration is not really a consideration at all. It's actually something that you just do not have to worry about. More and more hosts are moving to that and having that be the default. But if you're running your own servers, it may or may not be something that you're currently using. But maybe do a quick Google search and you can find really, really easy ways to make sure that your server is running HTTP2 instead. And usually it's as simple as, in a lot of cases, it may be as simple as switching your virtual host to listen for HTTP2 instead of HTTP by itself. So your mileage may vary, but as far as speed considerations go, if you're using HTTP2, then there's not really any, you don't really have to worry about it. Otherwise, it is a consideration, but that's the reason why we see some people who are using that technology encrypt or use SSL only on pages that absolutely need it, like login forms, admin panels, submitting credit card information, things like that. But to be honest with you, nowadays the price that you pay speed-wise is not really a big deal with newer technologies. So I would highly advise looking into that if you can.
So why would anybody be on HTTP1 now?
Well, it's just in a lot of cases where people have, forcing SSL across an entire site is something that really has started has become more and more important and being more and more talked about over the last like 2 to 3 years. It started actually a couple of years ago when people got on Facebook for not using SSL on all their, across their entire site. And so when they started kind of forcing that, we started to kind of see like a little bit of a movement, and obviously Google's contributions to that have been super important. And so really over the last 2 years, especially with all of the leaks and with the a lot of the exploits that we saw and vulnerabilities like Heartbleed, like it was like about a year and a half ago, secure connections have been really important. We see every day more and more about servers and sites getting hacked and customer information being stolen and things like that. And so if you're a website owner, having HTTPS has become a responsibility. But it's still something that across the world, people are slow to adjust. So some people have been running servers for years and years and years now on the same technologies that existed for years and years. And as newer updates have come along, it's just never been something that they considered. It's just never been something that they kept up with. Forcing SSL is actually a really good opportunity to kind of bring yourself back to equilibrium and start and ensure that you're using up-to-date technologies so that you can actually leverage SSL and not have to worry about the speed considerations.
Is there any implications of SSL for CDN?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, if you are using SSL on your website and you have a CDN, you may consult your CDN provider, because the chances are is that they have a completely different CDN URL for SSL traffic than they do for non-SSL traffic. So if you are forcing SSL across your entire site, double check with your CDN provider and find out what the URL or the correct domain you should be using is, to make sure that your assets are going to load, over SSL rather than their standard HTTP. In some cases, for some CDN providers, it's as simple as just putting an S on the end of HTTP. But for other providers like MaxCDN and NetDNA, they actually use a completely different URL. And even though your zone names are the same, the URL itself is completely different. And so it's one of those things that you have to kind of check with your specific CDN provider. But absolutely, absolutely. And CDN providers are actually really good about keeping up with the technologies that they're using. And so you can be confident that for most of the popular CDN providers that are out there, anything that you're delivering over HTTPS to them is going to actually be nice and fast. And the nature of CDNs as it is that it wants to deliver assets to servers that are closest to you. And with SSL, it's no different. It works the exact same, but certainly if you are forcing SSL across your site, or even if you're just forcing it on a couple of pages, those pages and those sites need to load your CDN assets over SSL, or else you'll get there are mixed content errors. I don't know if you've ever seen it before, but you get like a yellow lock. You'll get a yellow lock instead of a green lock, telling you that some of the items on your page attempted to load over HTTP instead of HTTPS, and as a result, it's not going to give you the green lock because that site is not completely loaded. That site did not load completely over HTTPS. Part of it loaded or attempted to load over HTTP, and a lot of browsers will actually choose to just not load that asset completely. And so for some visitors, if some of your pictures or some of your CSS style sheets, your JavaScript are not loading using HTTPS on a page that it should be, the browser may just exclude that file completely, and then your site's going to look broken. It's going to look off, or images are missing, or something's just not right. And so in all cases, you'll want to make sure that where you're forcing SSL, that you actually do an audit of your site to make sure that everything is using SSL appropriately.
He's much more knowledgeable than I am. So oftentimes when I go to WordPress sites, and I know very little about it, but oftentimes they're very weird and glitchy, especially on mobile devices. Is that one of the main reasons, or?
I mean, I guess it could be. For the most part, though, that's probably just a result of people who didn't really pay too much attention to coding their theme properly.
Is there more of a theme issue?
Yeah, those are more like theme issues than anything else, but it is a possibility. It is definitely a possibility, but you see things like that a lot less likely because mixed content errors where you're loading some assets from HTTP and some from HTTPS, on a page where they should all be HTTPS. Those kind of things, they happen frequently, but they're relatively easy to fix. There's actually a website called whynopadlock.com. And what it does is you put in a URL for a site that you're not getting a green padlock for, where you're getting a yellow padlock, and it will tell you what assets on your site are trying to load insecurely. And this is actually a really super helpful tool in identifying what things you need to be changing to make sure that your site is loading with a green padlock. For instance, I'll use the example here on my site. I'm loading with a green lock, so everything in Wino padlock should load just fine. But what it does, it loads your site and it analyzes everything and will tell you, yep, everything's good. All your assets, they loaded over. So it's telling you it's a valid certificate. It gives me the date through which it's valid until, in this case, it's through March 21st because I actually just issued the certificate today.
Maybe you did Let's Encrypt.
And I used Let's Encrypt for it. It calls 22 items on my site and all of them are secure. And then there's some secure calls made to other sites, fonts.google APIs, secure.gravatar, and fonts.gstatic. This is actually a really important thing here because if I was using a CDN, it would be in this section. It would say, hey, I made a call to a CDN URL, and those calls were also made securely. But if you're a developer,
Wow, it tracks those too.
it tracks them too, yeah.
Wow, that's pretty neat.
If you're a developer, this is actually really important too because as you can see, this site that, even though it's just a basic WordPress install, it makes a call out to fonts.googleapis.com. And so if you're calling an external API or calling external JavaScript or CSS, you'll want to make sure that those calls are made securely as well, to make sure that you're always getting, that everything that loads on your page, whether it sits on your servers or not, is called securely. And so that's actually, that actually also has an important note that when you're choosing APIs to use or you're choosing providers for certain things, you want to only use providers and APIs that actually offer that offer the ability to use HTTPS. In fact, I probably would not send any sort of API request to something that's not HTTPS. So if you're using any sort of service like that, you probably should consider switching.
What's an example of an API like that, for example?
I don't know of any API personally that does not offer an HTTPS option, but it would really be of utmost importance whenever you're actually using that API to modify something or change information or request information. I don't know of any personally that don't offer an HTTPS option, but if for any reason you are making calls to any sites like that, I would just consider it otherwise. But I mean, it is a good, Google APIs is a good example of something where you could very easily, by mistake, use their HTTP.
So it doesn't detect automatically, you have to select it and you set it.
Yeah, Google, fonts.google APIs, I have not checked, but they may do like a redirect now, because Google has taken such a strong stance on SSL. They actually may do a redirect from their non SSL calls to their SSL calls. But I'm not 100% sure on that. I could check for you, but I'm just not 100% sure yet. I would imagine that they do though, and in most cases, we'll probably see that transition happening already. It's not
Just a matter of time, huh?
just a matter of time, yeah. There is the movement to all SSL all the time is very, very, very strong. Stronger now than ever, and with things like Let's Encrypt, it's becoming almost inexcusable. What we're going to start seeing actually is hosts that support Let's Encrypt. They have Let's Encrypt installed on their servers, and what that's going to mean is that you could, like, at the click of a button, and with very little information, like as long as your domain is pointed at the server that has Let's Encrypt on it, you'll be able to issue yourself a certificate like nothing. And that'll be really good because it's making it easier for people who are building websites to actually get SSL before it.
And the Let's Encrypt can do the expanded as well?
The extended validations, the ones that it does right now, are not EV certs. They are standard certificates. I have not checked. I have not looked into whether they're going to be offering extended validation certificates. The only thing that I have currently used Let's Encrypt for is for just standard, for basic signed certificates, and so. But I would imagine that that will be something that will end up being a part of Let's Encrypt library at some point. If it's not already, I just have not. I don't know 100%. So I could find out about that as well.
Who is it you work for? You know this stuff good.
I work for a company called Pressable. We host WordPress websites, and so for
The site Pressable.
okay, sure. The company that I work for is called Pressable. Our specialty is managed WordPress hosting, so we host and service and provide support for nothing but WordPress websites. Let's Encrypt is something that we are going to be working toward putting on all of our servers, and what it's going to mean is that currently whenever you add a site to our system, you get a staging URL, and what that is basically if you deploy a site called Robert, on our system, you can build that site on like a test URL that we provide, robert.mystagingwebsite.com is what we call it. And Let's Encrypt will be actually really important and powerful in helping us make sure that we can provide SSL certificates to anybody on our system, like as soon as they deploy a site. That means that you can work on and build your site in a secure environment, and it's painless and easy to set up. So.
Well, as soon as one host does it, they all got to do it.
Yeah, there's a lot, and there's a lot already that do. There's a lot already that do, and that's really cool. It's great. It's good stuff because it means that those hosts are making it really easy for their site owners and the sites that they host to protect their users. So it's
Pressable local?
Pressable, yeah, we're based out of San Antonio. Yep.
Is it connected with Rackspace at all? Or?
All of our team works out of San Antonio, and we work on Rackspace infrastructure.
Because there's WP Engine, which I think is here now too, but in Austin, that's one of your competitors?
Yeah, WP Engine has been our longtime competitor, but also we're actually pretty good friends with them too. So.
How long have you guys been? Are you all part of Pressable or what?
No, I am part of Pressable. Denali is also a part of Pressable. Otherwise,
what's the history of the company? How old is it?
we're about 5 years old now. We'll be 5 years old this coming May, and so we've been doing it for a little while.
When you look at your HostGator, your GoDaddy, and all those other things out there, I can answer this myself. There are certain reasons why you would say you would go into that business.
Sure, yeah.
But there's certainly a lot more that would seem to indicate that it's like climbing up a sand dune, I mean,
sure, yeah.
That's it.
Well,
Depends on how you look at it. If you're looking at market share, it is.
For sure, yeah. Well, hosts like ourselves and like WP Engine, and there's other managed WordPress hosts like Flywheel and Pagely. A lot of these web hosts, we all specialize in WordPress, and that actually allows for us to be able to be super knowledgeable about niche topics like this, like SSL, specifically as it pertains to WordPress, the pitfalls, like how you can find easy successes, what tools you need, and like how you can actually be successful using SSL on your WordPress website. And so, especially for hosts like us, not only ourselves but all of our competitors, it's going to be tools like Let's Encrypt Let's Encrypt and the tools that you build to support that are going to be very, very important in the coming months and the coming years, because it's going to help push forward this all SSL all the time ideal that the internet is moving to.
Is Pressable a domain registrar as well?
We do not register domains. No.
So how is your, let's say, WP Engine I looked at, but they're quite expensive compared to like GoDaddy and one type pricing. Is that
different hosts have different benefits to them. Different hosts will target different audiences and offer different things, but specifically as it pertains to SSL, and how we actually use and deploy, how we actually use and support SSL is a little bit different between hosts. And so you'll see some hosts that will require unique IP addresses for every single SSL site that you run. Some that do not, because it's just because of the technology that they leverage. And so there are, as specifically as it pertains to SSL and WordPress hosting or hosting in general, you really have to kind of, when you're choosing a host, you'll want to look at how your host is using and leveraging SSL for their customer sites, because some hosts have setup fees, some do not. Some offer unique IPs and some do not. Some require unique IPs and some do not. And so there's just a lot of different options, and all sorts of hosts will have different.
What about themes? Have you guys have you created any kind of like strategic alliances with any specific themes?
We currently don't have any sort of partnership with the theme vendor, but one of the great things about the WordPress community is that it's actually everybody is very supportive of each other, and so any ways that we can actually reach out and help developers. As a host, we see a lot of vulnerabilities in themes. We see lots of exploits. We see lots of issues that crop up, and as a host, if we can provide that information to theme developers and plugin developers to help them fix potential issues in their code, then we do that. And so even though we don't directly partner with anybody as far as like sales or specials go, as a part of the WordPress community, and because we make our living off of WordPress, it behooves us to make sure that we're supporting other people who make their living on WordPress and helping push the community forward, because helping make sure that people's sites are secure on WordPress will help ensure that our businesses continue to grow, and that in the process of that, and as a result, customers and their users stay safe.
Well, if you're supporting WordPress, there's significant value in that, because if you go to the big mega hosters, they don't support any of this stuff. Once you get it up,
I think they all claim to support WordPress. I don't know if they actually do, though,
not
right?
really support it. They'll get you installed.
Sure, yeah.
But they're not really doing any kind of support.
It just varies, really. The level of support varies from host to host, but if you are looking specifically for WordPress support and people who can actually answer WordPress questions, then I would highly advise looking toward a managed WordPress host, because in cases like that, managed WordPress hosts have people on staff who specialize in WordPress and know WordPress and can answer WordPress questions. And not only that, but when you ask me about WordPress and SSL and their interaction and what you need to do, I could write you a book on it, but it's because that's my focus, and that is my niche, right? And so that's the specialty that we sit in.
The problem with books is by the time you're done, they're out of date.
Sure, yeah. That's why we keep learning. That's why we keep learning and trying to push forward. So,
is there any of the CDNs? You mentioned Mac CDN, and I didn't hear what else you said. But are there any that have known issues as far as SSL?
None that I know of. None that I know of. At least none that I've heard of recently. At least. Every big player that I can think of, and every good quality CDN that I can think of uses SSL, and any CDN provider that is either refusing to use SSL or just currently does not have it as an offering, I do not foresee being an option for a lot of people, because that's just not the way the web is moving. The web is not moving toward HTTP. The web is moving toward HTTPS. If you are using a CDN provider that does not support SSL or have an option for SSL, then you should probably get away, move to something different.
Because they're probably not going to be around much longer if that's the case.
Yeah, potentially, I guess. Maybe it's their side thing, but who knows?
That's possible.
Yeah.
What does it cost for hosting with your company like yours?
You can find our pricing on pressable.com. Same with any of our competitors. And if you want to talk more specifically about hosting, I don't mind talking with it a little bit afterward. But for now, I think we could probably end it really quickly with a demonstration on Let's Encrypt. This is probably a little bit low level for people who've never actually worked on a server before. But I thought it would be really cool to show how you can send a site from non-HTTPS to HTTPS using Let's Encrypt on a server very quickly. As we can see, currently this site that I'm running is just a little basic subdomain site called Photos. If I try and visit it over HTTPS, it doesn't work currently. The connection is not private. The certificate common name is not valid. It's actually because I have store.im Robert V running on the same server. It's trying to use that as the default certificate, and it's not going to work for this because that's not the subdomain for this. So I actually have Let's Encrypt pre-configured on this server, and what I can do is I can run just a very simple command. It's Let's Encrypt -auto. Let's Encrypt -auto. And when I run this, what it's actually going to do is it's going to look at my server environment and find configurations that it can use to create an SSL certificate. And so what it does is, in this case, it says which names would I like to activate HTTPS for. In this case, I want to do it for photos because it's not encryptless. So, and then I literally just hit enter. It's saying that I have an existing certificate that works for blog and for store. And it wants to know if I want to expand the certificate to include photos. And so I'm gonna go ahead and hit yes. And what it does is it actually takes a second to start going through the entire process of verifying, validating, and issuing a certificate. It actually even asks me if I want to allow both HTTP and HTTPS both, or if I want to just make all requests go to HTTPS. This is a server level setting, not a WordPress level setting. So if you wanted to, and I would recommend you would use the secure one, but purely for the sake of demonstration here, I'm going to use the easy one so that I can show you that the site works both on HTTP and HTTPS. And if I just hit enter, it says that my certificate's been renewed. It's renewed because I added a domain to it. And it actually will provide me with URLs where I can go out and test that these certificates are valid.
So that one certificate is good across multiple domains?
Yeah, most in a lot of places where you can purchase an SSL certificate, most certificate issuers will allow you to add multiple what they call SANs, subject alternative names. And in some cases, you can add like 10 plus subject alternative names to a single SSL certificate. And what that means is that you can add several domains to one SSL certificate, and they can all use that SSL certificate. That's what I chose to do here with this specific certificate. So here, Let's Encrypt actually has created and issued the certificate for me. It's gone ahead and modified Apache and all of the server configuration files. It's done all the hard work for me, and literally all I have to do now is refresh, and my site's available over HTTPS. And this is a valid certificate. There's no, if I visit SSL Labs is a really good place to go and validate and make sure that your SSL certificate has all the correct information and is working properly. You'll see that SSL Labs shows me that once it's done testing here, shows me that the actual certificate itself is 100% valid and correct, and that the domain is mine, and that everything is working the way that it should be. So it takes a second here to test, but as soon as the test is done, we'll be able to see.
You drop your domain in there, and is that what you did, or what?
Yeah, and actually, Let's Encrypt provides it to you. Let's Encrypt will actually provide the URL for you to visit, and so it'll provide the URL to test any certificate that I issue using Let's Encrypt. This says 33% complete, but again, just to kind of illustrate the point there, literally all I had to do was I had my server running, I installed Let's Encrypt, and Let's Encrypt automatically recognized my Apache virtual host configurations, and with literally just a single command and hitting enter a couple of times, it was able to detect what domain I wanted to use, validate it, issue the certificate, and modify all of the server's configuration files to then allow my site to run over HTTPS. And Let's Encrypt made that process super, super easy. Normally you have to send that CSR to a certificate authority, or you have to actually go through the process of self-signing certificates and all sorts of craziness. In this case, literally all I had to do was just run a quick command for using Let's Encrypt, and it did all that for me.
And Let's Encrypt will work across on a Linux server or WordPress server?
Let's Encrypt itself has several different operating system options and server type options. So it will actually detect the environment that you're running it in and see hey, am I running this in an Nginx environment? Well, I know I need to look for Nginx configurations or Apache configurations. You can even run this on OS 10 if you have a web server running locally on your machine. You can run it on OS 10, but it ultimately does not matter what you're using on the end, whether it's WordPress or Joomla or Drupal or just a basic HTML website. Let's Encrypt doesn't care what's on the end of it. It cares about the server software that you're running, and so it has a lot of built-in or baked-in options already. And as time goes on, they'll just put more and more in there. The support will grow and grow, and so like we talked about, this
is not just for WordPress.
No, it's not just for WordPress. It's for everything, right? Yeah. But what we will see is that we'll start to see that hosts and servers that have Let's Encrypt on them, you'll be able to literally install like a WordPress plugin to help get SSL certificates issued or renewed or revoked, things like that.
Even if it's not WordPress?
Well, I mean, if it's a WordPress, as specific as it pertains to WordPress, you'll have a WordPress plugin that allows you to leverage the Let's Encrypt software that's on the server that your site is on. So, but even if you're not running WordPress, you can use Let's Encrypt. People will build tools for other stuff. People will build web-based interfaces and things like that, and we'll see a lot of really cool things being done with Let's Encrypt.
I'm not so knowledgeable in this, but from what I understand, basically, people like WordPress because it's an open community, and there's a plugin or a theme for
just about everything. Yeah.
New York Times runs on that right now.
Yes, yeah, the New York Times runs on it. Yeah, I went to a WordCamp not too long ago where they talked a little bit about SSL, and the New York Times is making a move to, as large of a website as they are, they're making that move to be all SSL all the time. And it's actually a challenge they put out to the world. They put out a challenge to the world to move their sites to all SSL within a year. And so,
I think it's also kind of a matter, probably of liability to some things that,
sure,
in terms of best practices.
Sure, absolutely. So anyway, I think that's probably about it for now. We ran severely over time, I think, but I'm glad that we were able to have an informative discussion. If you have any questions at all,
you have a card?
I do have some cards that I can give out, but for people that are watching on the internet, you can reach me at robertb@me.com. If you have questions, or if there's anything that I didn't talk about or that you would like for me to clarify, you can reach me at that email address, and I can get back to you. But beside that, I hope everybody enjoyed, and thanks for being a part of it tonight.
This is great.
Very good. How many people
All right.
are watching online?
There were like 12, but now it's like 2. Thank you for everyone for watching. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.